What if I told you that the greatest teams in baseball history never won a thing? That the most dominant lineups, the fiercest pitching staffs, the rosters loaded with MVPs and Cy Young winners all collapsed when it mattered most? These weren't underdogs. These were titans, and yet not a single parade, not a single ring, just silence, disbelief, and a legacy of what should have been. This isn't a story about losers. It's a story about something even more haunting: greatness denied. Because in baseball, the best team doesn't always win. Sometimes history forgets them. But today we won't. Imagine dominating your sport so thoroughly that you're not just breaking records. You're redefining greatness. Picture a team so talented, so explosive, that even the most seasoned commentators are already whispering the word dynasty before the postseason even begins. Now imagine all of it crashing down in a single week. A bullpen implodes, a star player goes silent, or worse, history doesn't even give you the chance. This is the story not of failure, but of what should have been. Of teams that didn't just dream about championships, they built themselves for it. Crushed the regular season and had fans chanting this is the year. But fate, hubris, bad luck, or baseball's brutal unpredictability had other plans. This video isn't about who won. It's about who didn't and why. It's about the 2001 Mariners, the 2019 Astros, the 95 Indians, and even the team that never got to swing for a title, the 1994 Expos. We're pulling back the curtain on a painful truth. In Major League Baseball, sometimes even greatness isn't enough, and what's left behind is a void filled with what-ifs, haunted clubhouses, and entire cities that still whisper the names of rosters built for rings that never came. This isn't just sports. This is heartbreak, strategy, legacy, and every twist that turns a titan into a trivia answer. Let's start with a team that rewrote what dominance looked like, and then disappeared into postseason disappointment so quickly it felt like a cosmic joke. The 2001 Seattle Mariners. On paper, they were invincible, tying the all-time win record at 116. This was a franchise finally escaping the shadows of irrelevance. Ichiro Suzuki was in his first MLB season and already redefining what it meant to be a hitter. Batting .350, stealing bases like he was born. On first, and winning both Rookie of the Year and MVP in a single go. He was the quiet force that turned bunts into base hits and throws from right field into weapons. Surrounding him was a supporting cast that wasn't just good, it was peaking. Brett Boone had a career year with 37 home runs and a ridiculous 950 ops. Freddie Garcia was a pitching machine, leading the AL with a 3.05 ERA and 18 wins. In every metric that mattered, WAR, team average, the Mariners were writing a perfect script. The regular season felt like destiny, and then October came. Sure, they survived the ALDS against Cleveland, but barely. A 17-0 blowout loss in Game 3. That wasn't just a crack, it was a warning shot. And by the time they faced the Yankees in the ALCS, the wheels didn't just wobble, they came off. Ichiro, the hitting machine, suddenly stalled, batting just .222. The bullpen, the same one that helped anchor their historic win record, collapsed, giving up 40 hits in 5 games. The Yankees, still deep in their dynasty era, didn't just win, they outclassed Seattle. The Mariners lost the series for 2-1. And here's the gut punch. They haven't returned to the postseason again. For 21 years, all that brilliance, all that balance, and not even a whiff of the World Series. That 2001 team became less of a legacy and more of a lesson. That dominance doesn't always come with a crown. The heartbreak in Cleveland is its own kind of legend. Before the Cavaliers broke the city's 52-year championship drought in 2016, it was the Indians, now the Guardians, who were supposed to deliver glory, and no team was more prepared to do it than the 1995 Cleveland Indians. This wasn't just a good team. This was an all-time offense with an edge. They didn't squeak into the postseason, they obliterated the regular season, finishing 100-44 and lapping the competition by 30 games. You don't do that in the major leagues by accident. You do it when your roster is a nightmare for opposing pitchers. Albert Bell became the first man in history to smack 50 home runs and 50 doubles. In the same season, Manny Ramirez and Jim Thome each flirted with .310 batting averages and monstrous OPS numbers. Kenny Lofton was running wild, leading the league in steals and injecting electricity into every at-bat. And if you somehow made it to the 9th inning with a lead, you still had to face Jose Mesa, the closer with ice in his veins, 46 saves, a 1.13 ERA, and second in Cy Young voting. You couldn't outslug them. You couldn't outlast them. You had to hope they beat themselves. The ALDS was a statement sweeping Boston like it was just another Tuesday. Then they took down Seattle in the ALCS, neutralizing the very same Mariners team that would go nuclear 6 years later. The Indians looked unstoppable until they met the Braves. The 1995 World Series was supposed to be the coronation. Instead, it was a brick wall. Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine, and the most surgical pitching staff in baseball cut through Cleveland's red-hot bats like butter. Maddux went 16 innings with a 2.25 ERA. Glavine was even better, allowing just 2 runs in 14 innings. Bell, Ramirez, Tony Peppa, these offensive juggernauts suddenly forgot how to hit. Bell's 235 was somehow the best of the core trio, and yet, here's what makes it sting: they still almost won. 3 of the 4 games they lost were by a single run. That's how razor-thin the margins were. 1 extra swing, 1 error avoided, 1 call reversed. This team was too good to go quietly, but they did. Their dream season, loaded with historic numbers, ended with a whimper, and they never quite captured that same magic again. For fans in Cleveland, 1995 wasn't just a missed opportunity, it was a ghost that haunted the team for decades. Because they were ready, they just ran into a buzzsaw called Atlanta. The 2019 Houston Astros weren't just a great team, they were the culmination of a franchise rebirth. Years of tanking, data-driven scouting, and cold-blooded trades had crafted a baseball superweapon, and by the time the regular season closed, it looked like no one could stop them. They finished 107-55, the most wins in franchise history, and their 3rd straight 100-win season. It was a roster dripping with talent and experience. Yordan Alvarez crushed the Owl like a wrecking ball, putting up a .313 average, a 1.067 ops, and 27 homers, earning Rookie of the Year honors. Alex Bregman turned in the best season of his career with 41 home runs, a .296, .423, .59 to slash line, and a league-leading 8.9 WAR. Even outside of the big names, Yuli Gurriel and Jose Altuve added 31 homers each, and the team's batting average of .274 was significantly higher than the league average. But as scary as the offense was, it was the pitching that made them historic. Justin Verlander went 21-6 with a 2.58 ERA and won the Cy Young. Jarrett Cole wasn't far behind, 20-5 with a 2.50 ERA and over 300 strikeouts, finishing second in the Cy Young vote. These weren't aces. These were fire-breathing dragons. So when they beat the Rays and the Yankees to reach the World Series, it felt inevitable. Then the final act began. Game 7 against the Washington Nationals, at home. A 2-run lead in the 7th with Zach Greinke in command. He was cruising, just 80 pitches in. 1 run allowed, then a solo shot from Anthony Rendon, still manageable. Then A.J. Hinch pulled Greinke perhaps prematurely and brought in Will Harris, the very next batter. Howie Kendrick blasted a 2-run homer off the foul pole. The stadium went quiet. In that instant, the Astros lost control of the narrative. The bullpen, so reliable all year, unraveled, giving up a 5.73 ERA in the series, higher than their season average by nearly 2 runs. The Nationals would go on to win the game 6-2 and the series 4-3, and just like that, the dynasty was derailed. The most complete team the Astros had ever assembled became the one remembered for what they didn't do. Close. What makes it worse is the Astros-shaped shadow looming over this team's legacy, the sign-stealing scandal that had already stained their 2017 title. In 2019, everything was supposed to be above board. This was their redemption arc, but in the final hour, even without the trash cans, they couldn't seal the deal. Some heartbreaks happened because you were outplayed, some because you weren't ready. But the 1994 Montreal Expos, they never even got a chance to try. Their season is one of the most haunting what-ifs in baseball history, not because they failed, but because history simply pulled the plug before the strike hit in August. The Expos were 70 for 240, the best record in Major League Baseball. On pace for 106 wins, they were leading the Braves by 6 games in the National League East. This wasn't a team carried by one superstar or gimmick. This was a well-balanced, tight-bonded machine. The pitching was elite. Montreal led the majors with a 3.56 ERA and racked up 46 saves. They issued the fewest walks in the league. That's not dominance by luck. That's control, precision, and relentless execution on offense. Larry Walker was becoming a legend in real-time, batting .322 with 86 RBIs. Moises Alou was smashing a .339 average with a .989 ops, and behind them was a deep lineup that kept grinding. Then there was the rotation. Pedro Martinez was just emerging as one of the game's most electric arms. Posting 8.8 strikeouts per 9 innings, fourth best in the NL. Ken Hill was a quiet killer, leading the league with 16 wins and just 5 losses. They went 46-18 after June 1st, the best stretch in franchise history. The Expos weren't just hot, they were peaking. Attendance was finally surging, averaging over 24,000 fans per game. A run to 2 million total fans was within reach for the first time since 1983. This was it. The team, the timing, the trajectory all aligned. And then the strike hit. The season was canceled. No playoffs, no World Series, just silence. And worse than silence, decay. The Expos never recovered. The next few years saw an exodus. Ken Hill, Marquis Grissom, and Larry Walker all gone within 2 seasons. Payroll plummeted. Fan trust collapsed. By 2005, the franchise no longer existed in Montreal. They were moved to Washington, D.C., reborn as the Nationals. A team that was once on the brink of baseball immortality. Was a race like their shot at the 1994 title had been a dream, the Expos became a memory. A tragic cautionary tale of what happens when the business of baseball collides with its heart. Before we ever got to modern dynasties, free agency, or televised heartbreaks, baseball had already written one of its most painful upsets into the annals of history. The year was 1906, and the Chicago Cubs were not just dominant, they were mythical. In a season that still echoes more than a century later, they finished with a jaw-dropping 116 wins and just 36 losses. That's in .763 winning percentage, still the best in modern baseball history. They led the National League in runs scored with 704 and allowed the fewest, just 381. Their pitching staff recorded a microscopic team ERA of 1.75. Let that sink in. An entire rotation holding down offenses with an ERA barely above 1 and a half runs. Mordecai Three-Finger Brown, whose nickname came from a farming accident, not some colorful media label, led the charge with a 26-6 record and a 1.0 for ERA that defied belief. He didn't just pitch games, he owned them, and the offense wasn't lacking either. Frank Chance scored more runs than anyone in baseball that year while also stealing 57 bases. Harry Steinfeld drove in 83 RBIs and posted a .327 average. The Cubs didn't just beat teams, they suffocated them. They won the National League pennant by 20 games. That's not a race, that's a landslide. The baseball world was already engraving their name on the championship trophy. And then came the World Series. Their opponent, the crosstown Chicago White Sox, a gritty team with a team batting average of just .230 and none of the Cubs' firepower. This was supposed to be a formality. Instead, it became one of baseball's earliest shockers. The Cubs didn't just lose, they unraveled. Their bats went cold, managing just a .196 average across 6 games. Their dominant pitching staff suddenly looked human, giving up 22 runs. The White Sox, known that year as the Hitless Wonders, pulled off a 4-2 series win in one of the sport's greatest upsets. The Cubs would go on to win back-to-back World Series in 1907 and 1908, but even those victories couldn't erase the sting of '06. Because that team wasn't just built to win, it was built to dominate history. Instead, they became histories. Born a label, even the best team on paper can get punched in the mouth when it matters most. And more than 100 years later, it still stings. By 2004, the St. Louis Cardinals were one of baseball's proudest franchises, steeped in tradition, discipline, and a knack for peaking at the right moment. But that year, they weren't just prepared, they were stacked. Every bat, every glove, every arm was part of a near-perfect machine. They won 105 games that season, finishing with the best record in all of Major League Baseball. The NL Central wasn't even close, they clinched it by 13 games. Their offense, a juggernaut. At the core were 3 names etched in the Cardinals' lore: Albert Pujols, Scott Rowland, and Jim Edmonds. The MV3, as fans called them, all finished in the top 5 of MVP voting. Pujols hit .331 with 46 home runs and 123 RBIs, numbers that sound fake until you realize he did it while playing with surgical consistency. Rowland added Gold Glove defense at 30 for homers. Edmonds, he matched Rowland's power, dazzled in center field. and was arguably the flashiest outfielder in baseball not named Andrew Jones. Add and Larry Walker acquired just before the stretch run ended. This offense became borderline unfair. They led the National League in runs scored with 855, and their pitching was no slouch either. For starters had 15 wins, and Jason Isringhausen racked up a league-leading 47 saves. It was a roster built to win now, and it did at least until October's final chapter. They blasted past the Dodgers in the NLDS and outlasted the Astros. In a thrilling 7-game NLCS, then came the World Series and everything fell apart. Their opponent, the Boston Red Sox, who had just completed the greatest comeback in MLB postseason history by erasing a 3-0 ALCS deficit against the Yankees. The Sox were historic hot hand. The Cardinals ran into that buzzsaw like a deer in headlights. They didn't just lose, they were swept. For games gone, the MV3, the heart of that mighty offense, went 6 for 45. The team batted just .190 across the series. Only Larry Walker showed signs of life. .357 average to home runs and an ops north of 1.300. The rest, silent. And in doing so, this Cardinals team became the best regular season club in history to get swept in the Fall Classic. To make it worse, they became the final victim of the curse of the Bambino, a team that served as the final offering. Before Boston's 86-year drought was shattered, that wasn't just a sweep. It was a storybook ending for the other guys, and for St. Louis, it was a wake-up call. All the talent in the world means nothing when timing turns against you. By the early 2010s, the Detroit Tigers weren't just contenders, they were loaded with generational talent. From 2011 through 2014, they built one of the most fearsome cores in modern baseball. Power bats, elite arms, clutch performances, and just enough swagger to convince anyone watching that they were destined to bring a title back to the Motor City. But if there's one season that represented their best shot, it was 2011. That year, the Tigers went 95-67 and obliterated the Al Central, finishing 15 games ahead of Cleveland. The offensive engine was none other than Miguel Cabrera, arguably the purest right-handed hitter of his era. In 2011, he led all of MLB with a .344 average, a .448 on-base percentage, and 48 doubles. He didn't just hit for power, he surgically dissected pitching staffs. Alex Avila had a breakout year behind the plate, nearly hitting .300 with elite ops numbers. But Detroit's real weapon was its pitching. Justin Verlander entered his Final Four, earning a Cy Young and MVP in the same season. That doesn't happen. That shouldn't happen, but it did. He won 24 games, struck out to 150 batters, and posted a 2.40 ERA in a season where hitters stood no chance. Max Scherzer backed him up with 15 wins and a lethal fastball. Jose Valverde, the closer, was a perfect 49 for 49 in save opportunities. He was wild. He was dramatic, but he got it done, and with this team, the postseason looked like a formality. They dispatched the Yankees in the ALDS 3-2, and then came the ALCS against the Rangers, and the moment everything started slipping. Despite Verlander's brilliance and Cabrera's bat, the Tigers dropped the series for 2-2. Key injuries and a few bullpen hiccups allowed Texas to power through with clutch hitting and timely swings. But that wasn't the end. Detroit would return in 2012 stronger, wiser, and deeper. They finally reached the World Series, but then swept again, this time by the San Francisco Giants, whose pitching silenced the Tigers' offense completely. And by 2013, they were back in the ALCS but lost in 6 games to Boston in just 3 years. The same window kept creaking open and then slamming shut, and after 2014, it closed for good. Scherzer was gone. Verlander got hurt. Cabrera started breaking down. What was once an unstoppable force became just another rebuild. That's the tragedy of Detroit's super team years. So much dominance, so many MVPs, so many opportunities, and yet not a single ring to show for it. Before Moneyball, before sabermetrics became gospel, there was the 1950 for Cleveland Indians, a team that didn't need spreadsheets to prove it was dominant. They simply won. Relentlessly, that year, they posted a 111-43 record, the best in American League history at the time, a winning percentage of .7-1. It stood unmatched for 44 years. To say they were loaded would be underselling it. Their pitching staff was generational. Bob Lemon and Early Wynn each notched 23 wins, yes, 23 wins apiece. Mike Garcia added 19 with an Al best of .6 for ERA, Together, they pitched 77 complete games. That wasn't a typo. 7-7. This was a staff that didn't need help. They were the help. Offensively, they were a menace. Cleveland led the AL in home runs with 156 and finished second in runs scored. Larry Doby, the league's first black player and one of its best power hitters, smacked 30 to home runs and batted .272. Bobby Avila won the AL batting title with a .341 average. They finished 8 games ahead of the Yankees, who themselves won 103 games. Think about that. The team won 103 games and still came second. That's how good Cleveland was. So when they entered the World Series against the New York Giants, expectations weren't just high, they were stratospheric. This wasn't just about winning. It was about confirming their place in baseball lore. And then, in a moment that would become immortalized in highlight reels and museum exhibits, everything turned. Game 1, Vic Wertz hits a 460-foot bomb to deep center field. A guaranteed triple or maybe an inside-the-park homer, but Willie Mays turns and sprints. He doesn't just catch the ball. He makes the catch, a balletic, over-the-shoulder, gravity-defying grab that robs Cleveland and rewrites history. That moment cracks something, because after that, the Indians unraveled. Pinch hitter Dusty Rhodes, hardly a household name, hit to home runs and drove in 7 runs. In just 6 at-bats, Al Dark, a solid infielder, hit .41 to across the series. Meanwhile, Cleveland's offense so potent, so balanced, so devastating all season went ice cold. As a team, they hit just .190. They were swept in for straight games. Just like that, their masterclass of a season vanished into the shadows. This wasn't just a loss, it was erasure. The 1954 Indians remained one of the greatest teams ever, assembled that never got to taste champagne, and worse, they became a footnote in someone else's highlight reel, a victim of timing, of momentum, and of one legendary glove in center field. So what do we make of it all? These weren't flukes, and they weren't frauds. These were juggernaut teams that redefined what a complete roster looked like in their era. From the disciplined 1906 Cubs, who rewrote the meaning of dominance before StatCast even existed, to the 2019 Astros, whose spreadsheet precision met postseason chaos. From the 1995 Indians with their video game offense, to the 2001 Mariners, whose 116-win triumph became a lesson in postseason fragility. Every one of them had the numbers, the names, the narrative. What they didn't have was the ending, and sometimes that's what burns the most. Baseball is not fair. It never has been. It is a game of inches, timing, and bad bounces. It's a game where an MVP-caliber hitter can go 1-for-17 when it matters most. A manager's gut feeling can dismantle months of strategy. A player who spent the season on the bench can hit a game-winning homer. And sometimes, as in Montreal's case, the game simply stops, stripped away not by performance, but by forces no player could control. But if there's one thing these teams all share, beyond their statistics, beyond their records, it's the legacy of potential. They made fans believe. They created seasons that were unforgettable, not because of how they ended, but because of everything that led up to that ending. They made the game electric, brutal, and beautiful. They are reminders that sometimes history isn't written by the best. Sometimes it's written by the hottest, by the luckiest, by the last man standing. To be great and fall short, that's agony. But to be great and remembered, that's something else entirely, because in baseball, just like in life, the ending may be out of your hands, but how you play the game, that's yours forever.